Well, what's up, guys? Rick from DFS On Demand here with Week 8 of the NFL season. I wanted to mix it up as we're halfway through the year and talk a little bit about value this week. So this conversation is going to be framed a lot around value. If you are new to that term or don't understand what it means, essentially using our $50,000 of salary, we're looking to obtain a target goal of points. To win the Millionaire Maker last week, it was about 225 points. If I say that I want to return, 200 points from my $50,000, that would be 4 times value. 250 points would be 5 times value. Essentially, I'm taking every player's salary, I'm dividing it by 1,000, and the number of fantasy points that he scores over that new adjusted salary is what his value is. So if a $5,000 player scores two times value, it's 10 points. If he scores 3 times value, it's 15 points. That's what we're doing here. Okay, so that's the conversation that we're going with. Hope you enjoy. All right, so value is a kind of interesting topic because not all value is created equal. Most people and kind of the general thinking is, okay, if I want to score 200 points in NFL, every single one of my players needs to return 4 times his value. I don't necessarily agree with that. Someone like Todd Gurley, if he's priced at $10,000, would need 40 DraftKings points to return 4 times value. He doesn't necessarily need to have to do that. I kind of work within like a little bit of a sliding scale where your higher salary players do not have to score a complete 4 times value. Obviously, great if they do, but your lower value or your lower salary players in return would have to outscore 4 times value. So if you have a $4,000 player, you can't get 16 points from him and expect to win the Millionaire Maker. You might need him to score 20 or 24, which would be 5 or 6 times value, which would then cover, Todd Gurley only scoring, 3.5 times value or something like that. So that's kind of how I frame this. So let's talk. So I have this on my cheat sheet here. I have, my top projected values at each position. So here's quarterback. And it's interesting that Drew Brees pops off first. And I don't want to spend too much time on him because he's not on the main slate. He's playing in the Sunday night game. But what a really good spot for Drew Brees. Only $5,600 against Minnesota. So if you look at this, here they are. Here's Minnesota and New Orleans. A pick. I've actually seen Minnesota -1. A couple places have it as a pick 'em. But 52.5 points on the total. So Vegas expecting both teams to score basically 26 points here. And if that happens, Brees obviously in a good spot to score a lot of fantasy points. It's interesting because the Vikings, they throw a lot. They can put up a lot of points. This game could easily turn into a shootout. I'm a little bit surprised that Brees is as low priced as he is. And if we pull up his player profile, which is what we're looking at right now. So if Drew Brees is, and I'll actually just pull this up on the calendar for you, or the calculator for you, so we don't make any mistakes. If Drew Brees is, what did I say he was? 5,600. Okay, so if he's 5,600, and we want him to score, let's say 4 times value. He needs to score 22 fantasy points. Can Drew Brees score 22 fantasy points on the road, but in a dome against Minnesota? Well, basically, 1, 2, 3, 4 in 4 of his 6 starts this season, Drew Brees has scored at least 22 points. Or actually, I'm sorry, 3. Now, those 3 games he scored 30, 34, and 43 points, so it's been a little volatile. But that's the kind of upside that we like, and you have to determine, is Drew Brees going to be able to score 22? If he scores 16 or 17, like he did twice this year, you're looking at what? Basically 3 times value, which isn't really going to cut it. So now I like to think that this is a pretty good spot for him again, just because of what Vegas really, really thinks here. They're the first of the I don't even call them an underdog because some places don't have them as an underdog, but basically the highest projected underdog on the slate. I do want to show you this chart that I produce every week. And if you're listening on the podcast, what I'm showing is basically a projected value chart where basically it has the projected value across the x-axis and the player's salary across the y. And basically what you want to do is you want to find guys in the lower right-hand column or the lower right-hand side of this. Those would be your better values. So Case Keenum, just a hair over 5,000 being projected for, let's see, 21 points. That would be a good value. Drew Brees is here as well. And Jared Goff kind of round out their respective tiers as far as value goes. So I wanted to point that out. Jared Goff, this is the Rams are in such a high total game. Let's see where we have them here. I believe they're the highest projected team of the week at 33 points. They're 9-point favorites with a 57-point total here against Green Bay. So no surprise that Goff shows up, but I think Case Keenum is probably the most interesting guy that shows up as value here. And in my projections, I understand why this is, but kind of when I'm looking at it, I get a little bit nervous. So let's dive a little bit deeper into Case Keenum here. So Keenum I have projected at 4.1 times value. He's only $5,100, so I have him returning 21 fantasy points. So if we look at this on the surface and just go to his player logs, 21 fantasy points, not really that big of a deal for Case Keenum, right? Week 5, he scored 25. Week 6, he scored 22. He did lay a bit of an egg in week 7, scoring only 9.8 fantasy points. Week 1, he scored 25, so he's certainly capable of scoring 21 fantasy points. And he gets a matchup with Kansas City. As I scoot over to the defensive DFP chart here, he gets a matchup with Kansas City, which on paper is awesome. Kansas City's allowed like the 6th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And that is even with the numbers being really held down by Andy Dalton and Jeff Driscoll last week. Both guys made an appearance. This drives down the average. But look at this. Look deeper. Outside of Dalton, the only other guy that has not feasted on Kansas City quarterbacks this year is Case Keenum in week 4. Every other quarterback has scored 22 fantasy points. Some have scored, Big Ben scored 40. Phillip Rivers has scored 32. Case Keenum scored 8.8 in week 4 against this Kansas City team that has allowed everyone to feast on them. And now this game is in Kansas City. So yes, I'm concerned. I'm in a quandary here. I know we're talking about Case Keenum. We don't have to play him. It's not that big of a deal. But what do you do here? This is a situation where every quarterback, no matter how competent, has really destroyed Kansas City. You're going to have to throw a lot. This is a defense that we like to target, but we're now starting to get into the games where teams are seeing opponents for the second time. And this is the wrong side of it as Keenum goes to Kansas City this week. It's an early game. I'm concerned. So I'm interested to hear what you guys are going to do here. Let me know what you think about a situation like this where we have such a good defensive matchup, but a really, really bad situation that we've seen already this year. So I'll take my cue from you guys. All right, so flipping over to running backs, Lamar Miller is my top projected value. I think that's a little noisy, and he doesn't play on the main slate, so we don't really have to talk about this too much, but very, very quickly. So here's Lamar Miller. I have him at 3.97, so basically 3 times value. He's 4,700. So let's do this. 4,700 times 3. 14 points is what he needs for 3 times value, and he would need 18.8 to achieve 4 times value. So if we look at what he's done this year, he gets a big boost from last week, right? Scored 19 points last week, which is why I think this is a bit noisy for his projection, but not entirely out of the realm of possibilities for Lamar Miller. I don't want to spend too much time on this just because, it is a situation where he's not on the main slate. I don't think we need to talk about it too much. Kareem Hunt, right behind him, 2.94 times value is my projected value. Now, I think this is more interesting. Again, this is that matchup with Denver, and you can see, Kareem Hunt absolutely feasting the last couple of weeks. And if you're looking at my screen, you can see that his salary has not entirely caught up with what he's done so far. So if we go back to this, whoops. I'm terrible at clicking. Sorry about that. Just popped my face up. All right. So if we go back to this, week 1, Kareem Hunt was $6,900 on DraftKings. Had that really bad week 1. He dropped to $6,200. Had kind of a mediocre week 2, dropped to $6,000 in week 3. Week 3, he scored 16 points. Now he's back up to 6.5. He has a big week, then he drops. So his My point is his salary's been all over the place, but he has just now gotten back to what his basically week one salary was. So he's $7,100 this week. He was $6,900 in week one. And this is with 3 of the last 4 games basically scoring 30 points. So Kareem Hunt, I think his salary has been a little slow to catch back up to him, and we might get an opportunity to buy his essentially week one price, $7,100 this week, before it really jumps up. Because if he has another big game this week, it's going to be one of these situations where I think he's going to get a lot more expensive. So do we like him against this Denver defense? And if you just look at the season as a whole, the answer would be yes. Denver allowing the 4th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. You can see this here. Oh my gosh, I was confused. I thought I read the wrong thing for a second there. But Todd Gurley scorched them. Isaiah Crowell had a big game. Kareem Hunt, again, we're now getting back to these matchups. He scored 29.5 fantasy points the first time these two teams met. Now it's at home again. They're big favorites again. This could be another big Kareem Hunt game. So I think that's a really good spot to buy Kareem Hunt, just as we've kind of tracked his salary over the course of the season. And then Todd Gurley is my 3rd best value. Now I have him at 2.8 times projection. But I don't really think he needs to score that much. So I'll show you this chart here. And this is the same chart that I showed you for quarterbacks. Gurley's like right on the trend line, essentially. He's probably on the wrong side of it, just a hair, because his salary is so expensive. But I've got him for 27.9, basically 28 fantasy points is the projection. And he's far and away ahead of the rest of the league here and the rest of the guys at his position. So it's one of these situations where we don't need him to go for full 4 times value if we can kind of make up for it with maybe some cheaper options down later in our lineup. So keep that in mind. I don't think we necessarily need Gurley to go for 40, 30, 32, 34, something like that would be great. He's a touchdown machine. I don't need to tell you how good Todd Gurley is. All right. I'm gonna wrap up with tight ends. Tight ends are pretty ugly. Let's move over to wide receiver real quick here. All right, Robbie Anderson checking in as my top value. A little scary here, but I will say this. So I think there's a couple factors that lead to this. He's now got 20 targets over the course of the last 3 weeks, including 10 last week. So when I'm doing these projections, targets are a big indicator. So a guy who sees an influx of targets last week is going to project higher than he normally would. The problem is he only caught 3 of them. Okay, like it's not a great situation. I will say the last time Robbie Anderson, he tends to pop up here a lot because he's always so cheap. He's $4,100 this week. The last time he popped up here as a top value was the week that he went off. Let me see if I can find him real quick. This is the week that here we go. It was the 30-point week against Denver. Now, again, he only caught 3 balls in that game, so it's a volatile option, but he had 123 yards. 2 of them were touchdowns. That's obviously not something that is going to happen every single week, but that was the last time he popped up here. I didn't play a lot of them because I thought it was pretty noisy, and I still kind of think that it is. But if you look at it from another angle, Chicago's been pretty bad on defense the last couple of weeks, right? Like Brock Osweiler picked them apart. They're now like a bottom 5 defense against opposing wide receivers in terms of just pure fantasy points. And the Jets are 7-point underdogs. Like they're probably going to have to throw the ball like they do all the time, right? Because they're always losing. So on the surface, I don't think it's a terribly bad play, but I think it is a little noisy, to be quite honest with you. All right, now the next couple guys are all pretty close, but I don't really want to continue to talk about it. I've got Demaryius Thomas, number 2. We've talked enough about that Denver-Kansas City game. DeAndre Hopkins, we've talked about a lot of weeks in a row, also not on the main slate. Alshon Jeffrey, we talked about last week. Stefon Diggs, again, not on the main slate, right? So kind of tough. Then you get Robert Woods, who, we talked about Jared Goff. Woods down to $6,800 off of last week. Hasn't been this low since for at least a couple weeks. I don't have the digits in front of me, but I think this is a pretty good spot. Woods is a guy who continually leads the Rams in targets. They're going to score a lot of points. I don't mind that one bit. Jordy Nelson is interesting. So he popped off where I hate to even talk about Jordy Nelson, quite honestly, but he's popped up on this because of Amari Cooper being traded away. So the model looks for increased opportunity, right? If Jordy Nelson ends up moving to the slot here, I don't really mind this. I hate even advocating playing Jordy Nelson, but there are certain situations where you can play everyone, and there's certain situations where you can not play a guy, right? No matter how good or how bad. So Nelson is somewhat interesting. He has only had that one big week where he scored 32 fantasy points in week 3, and he hasn't done much since, but the model is looking for an influx of opportunity. He's only $4,700. If he catches a touchdown, he probably, eclipses 3 times value. So I think you could be in worse spots there. Okay. There are a few injuries that could open up value later in the week. So this is Wednesday. When I refresh this over the course of the next couple days, things are definitely going to change here. And then I was going to do tight ends, but quite honestly, I think the tight end position is so volatile that the model is having a really difficult time trying to project points alone and value in turn. So basically, it's kind of a lot of the same situations where the top guys like Kyle Rudolph or Zach Ertz, like they're not even on the main slate. There's a lot of noise here with like Evan Ingram and Eric Ebron. What I'm actually going to do is I'm not laying a lot of weight on this because I think it is such a noisy piece. I'm just going to show you and run over to our production shares tool here, and we're just going to kind of look at league-wide targets for tight ends and see if we can find anything interesting here. I've not looked at this yet, so we're going to look at it together. So if we're going for the entire season, no surprise, Ertz, Kelsey, Ebron, and Njoku lead the way, but we're looking to probably find a little bit of a smaller sample to see if anyone else pops out. So if we're just going for the last 3 weeks, weeks 5, 6, and 7, Ertz and Njoku and Ebron still lead the way, but then you get this Austin Hooper, which is kind of interesting. And if I go back to the teams here and see if I can find Atlanta, and just go 5 through 7. Let's see what we have. All right. So here's Atlanta. The last 3 weeks, Julio Jones still leads the team in targets. No surprise, 35 of them. Austin Hooper's second, 26. That's nearly twice as many as Calvin Ridley, 14, and Mohamed Sanu, 11. What's also interesting is Julio Jones has 24 receptions, 24 of those 35, and Austin Hooper's converting at a much higher rate, 21 of 26. Obviously, we know Julio Jones never scores a touchdown, but Hooper has in the last 3 weeks. So I think this is actually pretty interesting. A guy who's trending in the right direction. Let me see if I can find his salary really quick here. Oh, they're not even on the main slate either, are they? Oh my God, they're not even playing, which is why I couldn't find him on that's why he didn't pop up on the cheat sheet, and that's why I couldn't find him in the DraftKings. But when I was looking at my productions shares tool here, he popped up. Well, that stinks. All right, let's see if I can find someone who we can actually play this week. That was embarrassing. Let's look at the last 2. Here's Trey Burton. I know the Bears are playing. Okay. So Trey Burton, 15 targets over the last 2 weeks. Let's see how that compares to the rest of his team. Where is Chicago? Here we go. Alphabetical order. All right. Chicago. Ooh, interesting. So we go back to the last 3 weeks. Yeah, man, this is so crazy. So if you just look at Chicago, like really look at this. So targets for the last 3 weeks. Now, remember, this is an offense that has scored a lot of points in the last 3 weeks. Let me see if I can get this up real quick here. 31 points last week, 21 points the week before that, and 48 the 2 weeks ago. That's a lot of points. So then you look at their target share. A running back leads the way, 21 targets, Tariq Cohen. And Trey Burton, a tight end, is second. I bet you I can't find another team Well, maybe if you bet me, that has two non-wide receivers leading their target share over the course of the last 3 weeks, especially putting up this many points. So I think this is something that is of note, right? So here's the last 3 weeks. Burton's converted 13 of 15 for 149 yards and 2 touchdowns. If we go over to the entire season, I bet you he doesn't even have. Yeah, he has a third. Well, I guess that's about right. A third of his targets in the last 3 weeks. Yeah, that's about right. But he's got, let's see here, 24 receptions or 13. He's just been much more efficient. He's been much more efficient over the course of the last 3 weeks, and maybe they figured something out. But I think it's worth noting. Let's see if I can find his price here. He is $4,800 against the Jets, and then we'll just wrap this whole thing up by going to see what the Jets have done against tight ends here. And they are in the bottom. They're one of the best 5 teams. Let's see who they faced. Not a lot of tight ends. Wow, this is really bad. So they faced Detroit, Miami, Cleveland, Njoku, Jacksonville, Denver, Indy. So, I mean, they really haven't faced not that there's a lot of good tight ends, but they haven't really faced anybody, right? I mean, Ebron scored 17 fantasy points on them. That was the biggest game of the year. The rest of these are pretty lame guys. So Burton might be in a pretty good spot here if you're interested. There you go. Week 8 of the NFL season. I hope you enjoyed it. Changed it up a little bit this week to talk about value and the question of the week. Let me know what you're going to do with Case Keenum, a guy who is on paper in a really great matchup, but has struggled in their one matchup this year. It's kind of conflicting factors for us. So let me know what you think about situations like that. Tweet me. It's at DFS on demand, or leave a comment below. Talk to you guys soon. Later.